Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first Polar Bears International live chat of 2020 with Explore.org for the polar bear season. We are so excited to kick off this polar bear season, even though it looks a little bit different than what some of you may be used to, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. So my name is Alysa McCall. I'm the Director of Conservation Outreach with Polar Bears International, and I'm coming to you live from my living room in Whitehorse, Yukon, instead of Buggy One. But we do have a couple staff members on Buggy One. And yeah, I'd love to introduce you to them. So maybe guys, can we go around and everyone introduce each other, well, themselves, and don't forget BJ in Montana. Over to Dave and Kieran.
All right. Hi, I'm Kieran McIver. I live full-time here in Churchill, and I'm one of the PBI staff. I guess one of two now that call Churchill our home.
Yeah, me too. Dave Allcorn here, also Churchill resident. I've been in Churchill since 2008, and it is my home. And I fell in love with this area many, many years ago, and the Canadian Arctic and other parts of the Arctic is what I call home. And I'm very proud to be part of the Polar Bears International team here in Churchill, on the ground, boots on the ground every day in Buggy One.
Awesome.
And
thanks,
I'm
guys.
BJ Kirschhoffer, and I'm in the Bozeman office for Polar Bears International. Here with my Churchill scene behind me, so I don't forget what it looks like up there. But yeah, so happy to be with you today.
Yeah, it's so great to be able to chat to everyone, even though a couple of us might not be actually in Churchill this year, which seems very weird. It's amazing that we can still bring polar bears to you wherever you may be in the world and still talk to experts and see what's going on in Churchill live all the time. So behind me, I do have the live cam on my television through the magic of the internet and a Fire Stick, I believe, in my TV. So I believe I have the Lodge North cam on that one right now. And of course, Kieran and Dave are on Buggy One on the Tundra. And we have the Cape cams out at Cape Churchill, which have had some spectaculars this year so far, including this guy right now who is being lovely and hilarious. I was wondering, BJ and then maybe Kieran, if you guys could explain a little bit about how the cam setup might be a little different this year. Of course, with all the current restrictions, we could not send our usual big group of staff up there, so we've really dialed it back. And that's meant that things look a little different out there, on our end anyway.
Yeah, I think probably one of the biggest changes, of course, the lodge cams are based off of the tourist infrastructure there in Churchill provided by Frontiers North Adventures. So typically they tow out this long train car like facility. There's a picture of it there, and they can have up to 40 guests stay on the lodge there and enjoy the polar bears. Well, of course, because of COVID, the tourism industry has been heavily impacted there in Churchill. And so there's no tourists coming up, or very few tourists coming to the north. So Frontiers North was gracious enough to actually tow out just a couple of the cars for us, but we needed to provide our own power. So working with the folks at Explore.org, we put together a quick power system using much of the same things that we have out at the Cape. That stuff sits in a big waterproof box on one of the decks, one of the outside platforms there on the lodge. Dave and Kieran do have to go out and refuel a generator. It's kind of run like almost like a hybrid car model, if you will. You know, you're maybe like a plug-in hybrid. So we do run a generator for short amounts of time in order to get the batteries charged all the way up, and then we can shut the generator off and the system can coast for a certain amount of time before the generator has to run again. So that's probably the major change. Otherwise, really, from a viewer perspective, all the same cameras are out there. We've got the two cameras that Alysa mentioned on the lodge. We've got two on the Cape Churchill Tower in Wapas National Park, which have been streaming really almost uninterrupted since a year ago. Buggy One is also still operating this year, and we'll let the guys talk about that in a second, but the Buggy One camera is still on there. Aurora Cam's still up. So really, from a viewer perspective, not a whole lot has changed. It's just maybe there's a few less people in Churchill and a little bit different equipment making it all happen. And guys, maybe you could talk a little bit about, you know, your fall here on Buggy One. What's that's looking like?
Yeah, so it's certainly more quiet out here, that's for sure. I mean, just the last few days, Buggy One has been the only buggy out on the trails. So it's, you know, quite the change compared to last year. But I mean, besides that, you know, Buggy One is operating as usual. We're very happy that we're able to have these cams operational and that we you know, made some tweaks and stuff, but we were still able to get these live feeds of the tundra out to everybody. And like BJ had mentioned, we make frequent trips out here to the lodge cars just to keep these cameras out here topped off and keep the batteries charged up. So it is a little odd roaming around and not having much for traffic and not seeing other people. It's great for us to kind of, we get to have these bears to ourselves a little bit, which I'm not going to complain about that.
No, yeah, it's definitely there are a few bears around, and it, like Kieran said, it's to not even be concerned, like, well, you know, usually when you pull up next to a bear, you've got to be concerned about other machines on the tundra, like, are we going to block the trail? But here we just stop, and there's just nothing around, which is, I guess it's obviously unfortunate, I think, on the grand scheme of things for everybody else, but it certainly gives us some interesting and new opportunities to view these animals. The vehicle wherever Absolutely. We like on the trails, and not be concerned about moving it or repositioning to let other machines past.
And that's a good point, Dave. I think we probably have some newer viewers to the cam. And so maybe BJ and then Dave can fill in, be able to explain a little bit, especially to newer viewers, about the trail system, about the tundra, about tundra buggies. Can they just go anywhere, or, you know, what's going on out there?
Yeah, I think even though the guys are kind of in their own private buggy viewing area, we still do adhere to the rules that are out there. You know, of course, the vehicles are big and do leave an imprint wherever they drive. So there are a set of roads out there and trails that we all adhere to as buggy drivers. And so the guys just stick to the trails, and it seems to work pretty well. There's still enough bears around. The trails go generally where you want to be in order to find bears. So yeah, so I think it's kind of business as usual, other than you don't have to worry about a traffic jam out there, hey guys?
No traffic jam at all, no.
Thankfully for us too, we've had fantastic interactions with the bears. Even just today, we've seen a number of bears so far. We were able to identify, I think we're up to 5 individuals for today. We had a mom and cub earlier on in the tour, pretty much right at the start. We weren't too far down the trail before we stumbled across the mom and cub, which was fantastic. They came up and gave us a good close look and checked out Buggy One for a bit. And then not long after, we had multiple other bears that we've seen as well. There's 3 youngsters out here, some smaller bears, and then over the past few days, we've seen a large bear, a big fatty of a bear, super healthy, and it's always awesome to see those big guys. And he's been lumbering around quite a bit. I'm sure maybe we'll get to see him again today. And yeah, like I said, it's always nice when you see those big guys, you know, this late in the season.
I like those little fellas today, those young bears. They're often quite unpredictable because they're just sort of, I guess they're exploring the world for the first time. Sort of, I'm assuming they left their mother probably just earlier this year or last year. They're very small bears. And one of them had a bit of a grudge against another one there. There was 2 bears sitting down, and one of them got up and put its head down and just marched towards the other one, and it ran off. And
yeah, they're fighting for camera time, maybe.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a troublemaker.
So the photo that's up now is actually the bear yesterday, and like I said, they've been gracious enough to stick around the buggy. They're giving us a good view, and this one kind of just hung out for a little while. He might have been the same one we had today that I believe we had him on the camera as well. He popped up out of the willows. He actually stood up to get a better look above the willows, which is really cool to see.
Beautiful shots, Kieran.
Oh, it's really beautiful.
Very sweet. Okay, so I think well, I'd love to talk a little bit about polar bear biology and a bit more about these bears specifically. And if anyone has any questions, please do let us know. We have a series of live chats all throughout the fall. Polar bear season usually runs until end of November. Will be definitely available till then. Hopefully the bears are gone a little bit earlier than that, which we'll talk about in a moment too. But if you have any questions right now about polar bears, Churchill, what you're seeing, what we're doing, please do let us know. Before I dive maybe a bit more into the biology, though, I should circle back. And Dave, could you tell the viewers a little bit more about your background? You're kind of newer to the PBI family. I mean, we've known you for well over a decade now, I think, and have been trying to work with you more for years. And this year, with everything going on, it worked out for us that we could steal you for at least a season. Could you tell them a bit more about your experiences across the Arctic? Dave is an incredible naturalist and guide, and we're very happy to have him with us this fall.
Yeah, so I guess my sort of Arctic career started well over a decade ago, and I came in as a naturalist guide, worked for various companies in Churchill, and then I worked for the federal government with Parks Canada as a polar bear monitor for Rockwood National Park. And then I kind of got a little more into science. I worked as a sort of research technician at the local research station, the Churchill Northern Study Centre, and that got me sort of into the field in different areas. And then, then when I wasn't in Churchill, I ended up getting work on one of the ships, a company called Quark Expeditions, working as a naturalist guide, Zodiac driver in both the Arctic and Antarctic, but mainly the Arctic. And that was Canada, Greenland, Svalbard, Russia. So working with not working with polar bears, but working in different regions where polar bears roam. So I'm working with different subpopulations across the Arctic. And, it's really, really neat, not just from a wildlife perspective, but visiting some of those remote, far-flung northern communities in all of these countries. And the scenery, the people, and I've made the polar regions my life. It's where I want to be, and it's what I want to do. And it's the more I see polar bears, the less I trust them, but the more I respect them. It's they're a fantastic animal. From what we're talking about with all those big males, they've got this. I guess they live a life of blissful arrogance. They've got really nothing to be concerned about. And then you've got these little troublemakers, the youngsters, and you've got the females with the cubs, and everything's just different, and every year is different, every location's different. Yeah, I love doing what I do, and to be honest, I have a soft spot for the plants, the flowering plants in particular. I spent many of my earlier years in the polar regions crawling around on my hands and knees, looking at tundra, looking at the dirt, and digging up mosses and lichens, and flowers, all that stuff. So. Yeah.
That's wonderful, Dave. What do you think for you is maybe special about Churchill or these particular polar bears? Is there anything about Churchill, Manitoba?
Like what's special about these polar bears in my sort of opinion?
Yeah, I mean, you've been all over. Is there anything that really kind of keeps bringing you back to Churchill and the tundra like this?
I'm just drawn to it. There's I don't know what it is about Hudson Bay. I think it's Hudson Bay. It's more the body of water than it is the bears. I think that brings me back. There's something really powerful about that bay. I do really like these polar bears. I like it's almost effortless to look for them. And most of the other polar regions, well, all of the other Arctic regions that I've been working in, it's you're up. Someone's on 24-hour watch and with your binoculars out on the deck of the ship, or you're out hiking and you're always searching for bears. And here, you don't really need to look for them as much. They're just there, and people are there. And it's really interesting to watch the interaction between the people and the bears. For such a high concentration of bears and a high number of people that come through this area, there's remarkably few incidents, and I find that really interesting as well. And, it's just that I love living in an environment where these creatures live and wander. It's just fantastic.
It is such a special area. Thanks so much. So I am going to talk a little bit about these polar bears, especially I think maybe some of you are coming off from Brown Bear Week in Alaska. Well, actually brown bear season, I should say Fat Bear Week, brown bear season, which was incredible, by the way. How much fun is that? The brown bear cams are just so neat. You get to see these bears gorging on food every day, so happily getting fatter and fatter and happier before they're going to take a nice hibernation break here pretty soon. So it's a very, very always joyful cam. And we also do think the polar bear cams are pretty joyful and fantastic as well. But the situation here is a little bit different. Instead of watching polar bears as they're eating, we're kind of watching them as they've been fasting. So these polar bears in Churchill are part of the Western Hudson Bay subpopulation. And there are 19 subpopulations of polar bears around the world. And this just one population here. We've got this map pulled up. Thank you so much. We have KT Miller, PBI staff member in the background, mixing this show for us. Thank you, KT. So you can see where Churchill is there on the coast of Hudson Bay. And then you can imagine spread across the Arctic are the other polar bear subpopulations there. So Hudson Bay completely freezes over in the winter and completely melts in the summer. And this is what these bears are adapted to. They go out on the sea ice all winter long and they hunt seals. And they really rely on seal blubber as their main source of calories and food. And let me tell you, these bears need a lot of calories. Polar bears are the biggest bears in the world. They can get to be the biggest of the big. And the blubber is so calorie dense. It helps these bears get big and fat and stay protected against the Arctic cold and allows them to fast for periods when hunting's not as good. So here's a picture of a bearded seal, I believe. Polar bears mostly eat bearded and ring seals as their main sources of food. But of course, in Hudson Bay, in the summer, the ice is gone. So these bears come ashore and they hang out on the tundra, sometimes too close to people and communities, which we can talk about later. But generally, they like to stay away. This bear here is in the willows, super cute. And mostly these bears, again, are fasting. They're not eating. Of course, seals do not live on land, so the polar bears don't have a lot of food when they're on land. They absolutely will eat, berries, eggs. They can get their mitts on a goose occasionally. They are going to eat what's there. Bears love to eat, as you've been seeing for a while. Bears love eating all day. But polar bears really need to get back on that sea ice and hunt seals when they can. So what we're seeing right now in Churchill from the Tundra Buggies is we're seeing these bears at the end of summer, of course, and we're going into winter. So the sea ice is going to freeze soon, which is super exciting. This is a very anticipatory time for polar bears. And we're watching them starting to come to the coast and congregate in larger numbers. Again, not like the brown bears necessarily, where you'll see just a ridiculous amount of brown bears all in one spot. The polar bears are a little more spread out, but they are coming to the coast in anticipation of Hudson Bay freezing soon. And Hudson Bay freezes over first right around Churchill, because Churchill's on this bit of ledge of land. If you look at a map of Hudson Bay, the ice starts building up and the bears can get out sooner if they're kind of near Churchill to get on. So it means early dinner for them, earlier. And we just are going to keep an eye on the ice throughout the season. Basically what we do is every day, we're checking the ice maps, we're checking the state of the Arctic, we're looking at when the ice starts forming, and we're watching these bears get ready to leave and go out on the ice. So as much as we love seeing them and what they're doing, we're kind of rooting for them to leave at the same time. So polar bear season, it is different than brown bear season and a few different ways, but we still get to see beautiful bears doing amazing things, hanging out. There's a lot of cool stuff you might be able to see this year on the cams. And Polar Bear Week is coming up. It is the first week of November, and we're going to have lots of fun stuff going on for Polar Bear Week, including some polar bear bingo, self-care polar bear items, some neat meditation stuff potentially. We're just going to try to really appreciate the Arctic and the tundra and these bears and what they can teach us about what's going on in the world and how they can inspire people to want to take charge of the future for polar bears and for ourselves too. So we love being out there with the bears, and we're so thrilled that we can be there with you and have you watch the bears with us. And it's so interesting for me to watch the Buggy One cams. It's such a different feeling. I was thinking about this the other day. I've been so fortunate to be able to be on Buggy One for many years. Not nearly as many as BJ. But Well, I appreciate the polar bears when we're there and we're seeing them in person. Of course, nothing really can compare with that. But to be honest with you, things get really hectic on Buggy One, and Kieran and Dave can attest to this. Kieran all day yesterday, and Dave, they were just problem solving, tech shooting with PJ. It's nuts. It's busy out there. It might not look that way, but when I'm at home here, and I'm still busy, but I actually find myself taking more time to just appreciate the polar bears on the cam and just chill out and watch them. And it's actually been a bit of a nice change of pace in some ways just to watch them that way, though I can't wait to see them again in the future. So we do have a few questions rolling in, and then we're going to keep going with our outline here. We're going to talk for probably another like 20 minutes or so, but the Polar Bears International staff is always available to answer questions. We're always in the comments of the explore.org cam. We're on Facebook. We have live chats every week, so we're always here. But we have a couple great questions, and I touched on a few of them, but let's reiterate because I think this is really important information for polar bears. So 6-year-old Amelia wants to know, what do polar bears eat when the ice is melted? Such a good question. And the answer is not a lot. They're going to look for what they can, for berries and eggs and whatever they can on the tundra, but they don't have a lot of food. There's no seals on the tundra. Kieran and Dave, do you see them kind of chewing on anything out there right now, or are they kind of just conserving their energy and laying around?
There's definitely some energy conservation happening, as you can see in the photo there now. That was a bear. We hung out with that guy for a while the other day, and aside from getting up and stretching, and they often pick their noses up and take a sniff, he hung out and he was quite happy there, just sleeping throughout the day. But we've also seen so far this year the bears, they'll scratch away a little bit in the kelp sometimes, and you can see them nibbling on the kelp. And we did have one on the camera, I believe yesterday, and I couldn't tell what he was chewing on, but he had something in the willows. And like you said, Alysa, they'll sometimes snoop around and they can, find eggs and, maybe something a fox had stored away a little while ago, and the bear stumbled on it. But they'll nibble on various things out here for sure. In the summer, we do see them eating berries sometimes, and different things on the tundra.
Yeah, and of course, some bears do get lucky. There are dead seals will wash up on the beach, or a dead whale if they're really lucky, and then it's
nice.
Kind of if a bear. There was a couple of beluga carcasses washed up locally this summer, and a bear can get a massive feed of a carcass. So
yeah, dead whales are gold. Sorry, what was that?
No, they do have some access to marine resources through the summer months if they're lucky. It's opportunistic, and it's not all the time they have access to seals and whales when they're on shore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, dead whales are such an important source, can be an important source of polar bears in certain situations. Oh, as always, seals are the number one, but for a polar bear to have a dead whale as an option can really help bears last for a while. And that was part of a research on a year or two ago now, showing like how polar bears have gotten through some tougher, warmer times, and dead whales seem to have been part of that. Of course, we are heading into times that are warmer than anything we have recorded, and polar bears cannot rely on dead whales as a source. They're kind of just an opportunistic thing. But that is one interesting thing about Churchill having the beluga whale migration there every summer. And Kieran, of course, is the beluga boat captain on the waters in the summer. And Kieran, can you maybe just give us a quick blurb about how beluga season went, and then how it's maybe different than polar bear season for you? Do you have a favorite?
I don't know. I think, I'd love the belugas, and every year I'm excited for the season to start. And from when you get to see your first belugas migrating back into the estuary in the spring, I just, my love for them just it gets crazier and crazier every year. I can't wait to see them each summer. So it's awesome spending time with them out on the water. Of course, we're on a boat. This year we did have a new beluga boat. It was a 19-foot aluminum boat, so that was fun getting out there. It is there in the photo. Spending time out on the new boat was a lot of fun this year too, and we had relatively good weather and somewhat decent conditions. We do see too, like, some different animals. I know we were talking a little bit about the differences between the bear and the beluga season, and aside from, say, being on a boat on the water, and then of course being on this large buggy on the tundra, there's some different animals such as the terns and the Jaegers that we often see fishing in the estuary and on the bay. And then now, aside from the bears, we're seeing lots of ptarmigan, snow buntings, and snowy owls and things like that. So I should say too, I'm just excited for the fall to start. It's hard to see the belugas leave, but I know not far behind is the polar bears arriving, which is just as exciting. And same as the belugas, I think every year I just get more and more excited to be here and to see the bears and to get them up on the cams for everybody else to view as well, and see other wildlife like that red fox there that we got to spend some time with yesterday.
Very cool. Yeah, another beautiful shot. It's so great to see all the other wildlife too on these cams. Besides the belugas and polar bears, all the other stuff around is so fun to watch. We have a question from Eagle Girl about the polar bears being tagged. Are any of these bears being tagged? Has there been a count done year to year? And that's a great question. One special thing about these Western Hudson Bay polar bears is that because they are so much more accessible compared to other populations, this bear's being pretty funny right now on the Cape Cam. These are actually some of the best studied polar bears in the whole world, which is pretty special. These bears have taught us a lot about polar bears and a lot about what happens to polar bears when you start to decrease their sea ice home. So these polar bears in Western Hudson Bay now have about 3 to 4 weeks fewer or less of sea ice than they used to. So ice is melting a little earlier here and freezing up a little later. So these bears are fasting for longer periods of time. And polar bears lose about 1 kilogram of body fat a day when they're fasting. So it does add up. And there is a limit, of course, as there is with any species, of how long you can go without eating. So these polar bears have allowed us to gather a lot of really important data about the species. So they are tagged. Many of them are tagged. There is a research program here run by Environment Canada and Climate Change, along with the University of Alberta and actually other partners as well. These polar bears have been studied since the 1980s, and take a look on the cams. You might be able to see, if we get a good close-up of a polar bear once in a while, many of them have little white ear tags in them. That means that the bear has been handled by scientists. Every ear tag has a little number in it. So every bear has its own individual number, and it's put into this database. And so if you capture a bear that has a number already, you can look that bear up and see how old it is and when it was captured before. And we actually have a pretty robust population census of these polar bears. Of course, not every bear is tagged, but we've been able to really well understand what's happening to these bears over time. Of course, 2020 is going to be a gap year. The researchers were not able to get out this year and handle the bears. But we still have quite a bit of very important data that we can rely on to teach us about these bears. So there is a count done most years, and different types of counts. You can do aerial surveys, you can do the hands-on capturing. When scientists do the hands-on capturing, it is by helicopter, and the bears are tranquilized first. So they go to sleep for about an hour or a little more while the scientists, give them an ear tag, take some samples, take some fur. In the fur, you can analyze all sorts of things like toxins and see what's going on in the polar bear's body. You can find out about their diet from their blubber or from their fat. Polar bears have fat, not blubber. There's things we can find out from these polar bears. And again, they really teach us about what's going on across the world. So we have some more questions, but I want to kind of use this research chat as a bridge because BJ has been very involved in different research projects at Polar Bears International. We have research projects across the Arctic. One in particular is happening in Churchill. And BJ, could you speak a bit about the SpotRF project and then any other project that you're involved in that you'd like to speak about? There's some pretty cool stuff happening out there.
Sure. So I think Alysa and maybe even the guys there on the buggy briefly said, as polar bears spend time on land, if they overlap with people, that's kind of a bad thing. Polar bears and humans in the same space generally ends up poorly for both species. One of the initiatives here at PBI is to try to find tools that might work as some sort of early detection system for communities in the north. And one of the tools we're using is it's made by a company called SpotRF, and it's a tracking radar is what it is. And so it's electronics that you can put on the tundra. They're about the size of an iPad or so, and they see movement, and it can place that movement in the form of like here we go. Here's an illustration of it here. It can show you where the movement is happening on a Google map. So this is what the radar output looks like, and that orange line that you're seeing was a bear that walked by the radar system last year at the Tundra Buggy Lodge, pretty much right where the guys are sitting with Buggy One right now. So we can tell all kinds of information about the bear, which way it's heading, things like that. But not everything that moves on the tundra is a bear. This tool is super sensitive. It can even see the little snow buntings and little critters running around. We've picked up things as small as the hares out there, as well as the just anything that can be running around, Arctic fox, things like that. You can see this video here is actually showing the radar is driving this camera to focus on the bear that you see walking around, and you'll notice it's nighttime here. Of course, the radar can see after dark, which is really important in the Arctic. For half of the year, it can be very dark in these communities, and then the other half of the year, there's tons and tons of sunlight. So this tool can it can see through the dark. It doesn't need light. So one of the things we're working on this year with the tool is training the AI portion of it. So it has kind of some machine learning built in, and we're hoping that it will work to be able to predict what the targets are out in the space out there, out in 3D space. So is it in fact maybe an Arctic fox running around, or is it maybe a polar bear coming close to the town? So so that's what we're working on. The guys are actually stationed at the lodge right now, helping me figure out some issues with the system right now in terms of connectivity. So it's not quite up and running yet on the Tundra Buggy Lodge, but it has been functioning for an entire year on the Cape Churchill Tower out of Wapus National Park. If you have been tuning into the cams over the last summer, if you've noticed abrupt camera movements, there's a picture of the Cape Tower there. If you've noticed abrupt camera movements, it's probably the radar taking over, not one of the camera operators from explore.org. And of course, the radar can, like we saw there in the video, train the camera on whatever the movement is. We saw lots and lots of caribou this summer with the system, and we're training the system, the AI, to be able to predict what those caribou are as well, because we could maybe filter out those things. But so that's the SpotRF project. Super exciting. There's some caribou there at the Cape. Way cool. So that's the SpotRF. I think it could be a really neat tool for communities in the north, for, like we say, trying to keep polar bears out of towns, or maybe provide people with some warning that bears are coming close to a community.
Mm-hmm. And BJ, with this year maybe being a little different in the number of people around Churchill, will you be able to compare this year's data with previous years and see if you can see anything? I know we usually prefer longer term data sets, but you've got a couple years of RFs now from past years. Could this year say anything different, do you think?
Yeah, I think one thing that's helping us, typically there are a fair amount of buggies driving around, mm-hmm. and the radar can't see through buggies. Buggies are like, almost like a driving barn, right. And the radar can't see through that. And so we did notice when we were comparing human observations with what the radar could see, all of a sudden these bears were kind of disappearing. And it's really because these buggies are creating these big shadow areas, almost like if you were to, hold your hand in front of a spotlight, and your hand's going to create a shadow. That's kind of the same thing with the way the radar works. The buggy will create a shadow area, and it can't see the movement that's now behind the buggy. And then when the bear pops back out, so I think with less buggies up there, we're going to be able to get kind of just more information about what a polar bear looks like to the radar itself, hopefully helping us with that AI portion of the system.
Very, very cool. Thank you for that explanation. And if anyone has any more questions about that project, we're always here to answer. And again, we're around all season. So this is just our kickoff live chat, get some kinks out, get used to this new system we have. And we look forward to speaking to you a lot more about the topics. in the coming weeks. So we have a couple more questions here. We have a couple from Bluebird. A few from Bluebird. This is great. I've got multiple open on my computer right now, so reading everyone's questions as they come in. When is mating and birthing season in that process? Very good question. So polar bears mate generally in the spring, as most animals do. But if the female isn't technically pregnant, those things like she's kind of pregnant, but they'll mate in the spring, and then the female will come on shore in Hudson Bay anyway. And if she's fat enough and healthy enough, then that zygote will implant. So this is called delayed implantation. So if the zygote implants, then the female polar bear is pregnant, and she will be entering her den right around now, if not already. So if there's a pregnant female polar bear out there right now, we probably won't see her. Usually they are pretty darn fat. They just pile on the calories to prepare themselves for giving birth, you know, again, similar to many animals, including humans. So the females will enter their dens, and they're going to rest for a little while. And at least in this area, they're going to give birth around January 1st. That's usually the birthday that we assign all the cubs, is January 1st. It might be a little before, it might be a little after. They're going to stay in their den for a few months. While those cubs, you know, they're born so little. When the cubs are born, they're just tiny, and they need to get a lot stronger. So they are drinking their mom's milk, which is, when they're born, about 33% fat. So very, very fatty milk. The cubs grow really fast, but they're going to stay in their den, protected by their mom, nursing, getting bigger and stronger. And then when they're ready, which again in this area is about late February or March, they're going to break out of their den. And the mom is going to take them to the sea ice. So they go on a little journey to the sea ice. And sometimes it's a little far, actually. They can go a little while on those eggs. And when mom is on the sea ice, she's hungry. Because if you do the math, so mom hasn't eaten since maybe late spring, early summer. And then she's come onto land, fasted, gone into her den, given birth, nursed her cubs, taken care of them, and now she's walked to the sea ice. So these polar bears can go up to 8 months without eating, which is nuts and very cool. So those are the female polar bears. They are pretty darn tough mothers, that's for sure. And then the mom is going to care for those cubs for about 2.5 years. So the first year, the cubs are called Cubs of the Year, or Kois. The second year, they'll be yearlings. And then the year after that, they'll be with their mom for a couple months. And then that spring, she'll boot them out so she can mate again. And then those cubs are known as subadults. And that's who I believe Dave and Kieran maybe have been seeing a few subadults. Dave mentioned earlier that the couple small bears they saw yesterday were probably ones that left their mom earlier this year. And these tend to be the bears that get in the most trouble. Of course, they're smaller. They're not as good at hunting. They're a little more curious, a little more, risky maybe. And so they tend to get in a little bit more trouble than the other polar bears. But that's a very abbreviated version of the mating cycle. Mate in the spring, you give birth in the winter, you have your cubs for 2.5 years, and you repeat the cycle. So polar bear mothers have it pretty tough, but so do most polar bears. It's not an easy life out on the Arctic sea ice, holy smokes, but they make it work. And then Bluebird had another question kind of in that vein. I was hoping to throw over to you, Buggy One guys. They have been looking at these male-male encounters, maybe some sparring, maybe just some interactions. Would you be able to talk a little bit about are these polar bears socializing with each other the same way like brown bears do? Do they play with each other? Or what's going on with these polar bear interactions out on the tundra that people might see on the cams?
Oh my goodness. It's quite a difficult question. So do they socialize? I mean, yeah. Often you'll see bears as just individuals. There'll be the females with the cubs, and then you'll see other bears just as individuals scattered around. But they do seem to have an ability to socialize. They might be individual bears, but they'll be hanging out in the same area, the same general area. So they might be within sort of, a few hundred meters of each other, even 50 meters of each other, but they've got their little spots, and they seem not to want to do much with each other. But then they will get up and check each other out. The sparring, that sort of, it's more than likely. It seems to be male and male. It's rarely documented otherwise, but it's two males of roughly the same size, rearing up on their back legs and sort of giving each other a few whacks. That happens. It does happen at other times of the year, but we see it mostly at this time of year, sort of mid to late, what we call polar bear season, that October, November. So, sort of 10 days either side of Halloween. It seems to be when the bears get up on their rear legs and just whack each other, but it doesn't seem to be aggressive. There's rarely blood. They'll just sort of have a little bit of a scrap, if you like, a little bit of a fight, a little bit of a play fight even, and then they'll just go sit down and
take a rest,
take a little break, and then maybe fight again. Maybe go pick another fight with somebody else. But I don't know if I truly understand why they're doing this. I don't know if the bears would be able to recognize that same bear again out on the ice. I don't know whether they're just sort of, whether it's playing, whether it's sparring, whether it's practice. I'm not sure what that would actually be. But it's fascinating behavior.
It's always super fun to see sparring out there like that. Yeah, and I think Dave, you answered it perfectly. We don't really know. We're just guessing at what they're doing, but it's so wonderful when we do get to see that. We're going to take a few more questions and then start to wind down. BJ, I'm going to throw this question over to you because it is a stumper. We have Ella from Ohio asking, what do polar bears look like at night when there's no sun to reflect upon their fur? Which is a wonderful question.
I was hoping that you were going to answer that one. That's a good question. Polar bears are pretty hard to see at night, especially if there is no sun, no moon, no stars, or anything out there to illuminate them. The tundra can be a really dark place. That being said, if the northern lights happen to pop out or a little bit of moonlight, you can actually, if you let your eyes adjust, you can see a pretty long way. So, so that's a good question. If there's no light out there at all, boy, they're pretty tough to see, Ella. But very good question.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a pretty educated question, Ella, because polar bears aren't actually white. For those of you maybe new to polar bears, their fur is clear and hollow. And it looks white to our eyes because the sun hits it and the way the light scatters makes our eyes perceive them as white. And of course, under sunsets and sunrises and beautiful colors in the sky, polar bears pick up all sorts of colors in their fur, not to mention just the straight up dirt that they might have in there after rolling around on a muddy tundra. But yeah, when there's no light, then who knows? Well, that's maybe one good thing about the radar too, is that it can pick polar bears up no matter if it's day or night. So a couple more great questions coming in. Do the male bears eat the cubs if the opportunity arose, like the brown bears? That's from Kathy in Alberta. Yes, they do occasionally, and they're hungry. And we've actually seen that on the tundra, in different years on the polar bear camps themselves. I don't know if BJ, if you want to speak a bit to that too, because we've seen that happen in person and it's part of nature. But yeah, it's not the most fun thing to witness, that's for sure.
I don't know. The guys are up there. Maybe they could. Could get this one. Yeah.
I haven't witnessed it myself. It does happen, and I've heard from other people who have seen it happen out here before. I've seen interactions between mothers and cubs, and when a male bear does approach. In particular, just down, we call it Gordon Point, not far from where we are now. There was a mom and two cubs, and she was able to, I think, smell that there was a male bear nearby, and we were able to see it on the opposite side of the lake. And it was interesting because she actually kind of scattered. She took off and trotted away with her two cubs, and they sort of looped around to the other side of the lake there, and then they went upwind from the bear, or the male bear. And once the male bear kind of made it to that point, it was, kind of confused where she left to and was looking around, but they want to keep a ways away because that does happen, and it is unfortunate. We don't like to see that out here, but like Alysa said, it is Mother Nature.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen it a couple of times. It's just carnage. But those female bears, they're not to be messed with. They really do mean business. They'll try their best to avoid encounters with a male bear or any other bear. Typically, they'll be gone and won't even let the other bear have anything to do with it. But that those few times when that male gets a little bit too close, she's full bore straight towards it with intent to damage the male. She's not going to let that male get anywhere near those cubs if she can avoid it. So she'll definitely pick a fight, put up a fight to stop that from happening. But if that cub gets separated from the female, or if she's got more than one cub to protect, it's even more difficult now. She might have one cub, but one separate. In the incident that I witnessed a few years ago, and then the male did go in and consume the cub.
Yeah, never fun to witness, but definitely happens out there. It does seem like it tends to be the skinnier males that will do it, so the hungrier males. Not every polar bear seems to have that streak. Maybe it's part of the personality, maybe it's just all hunger driven, but yeah, it happens. But like Dave said, you got to get through a mama polar bear first, and that's no easy task. So
it's a business. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, there's just a couple more questions and then we're going to wrap this up. So Bluebird has another question about how many bears and how broad is their travel hangout territory, and do bears tend to stay in the same area? That's an excellent question. So the Western Hudson Bay population, it used to be about 1,200 polar bears in the 80s. Now it's closer to around 800 to 900 polar bears. So it has declined, but that's the number of bears that are around. You are not going to, unfortunately, see 800 polar bears on the cams, I have to tell you. That means they're spread out down the coast throughout Wapask and moving around all the time. So that's roughly this population size. In the world, there's anywhere from 23 to 26,000 polar bears. So the Western Hudson Bay population is just kind of one subset of all those polar bears in the world. And how broad is their territory? Also an excellent question. Polar bears are not territorial. So that's a big difference between them and brown bears. Brown bears can find a patch of good resource land or water or whatever, and they can defend it because they know there's going to be food there. This is theirs. They want this food. Polar bears, it's very different. They have to just keep walking around and trying to find these seals. And if they were expending a ton of energy defending this territory, it would not have a great payoff for them. So they will kind of walk around in different areas every year. They don't tend to stay in the same exact home range. But if we just look at individual years and where polar bears go, the variation in their home ranges is massive. It can be anywhere from 500,000 square kilometers to 50,000 square kilometers, depending on the area they're in, how resource rich it is. For example, polar bears in the James Bay section of Hudson Bay, so that's like the little bay that comes off of Hudson Bay, they tend to have much smaller home ranges than the Western Hudson Bay bears where we are, who have to walk a lot more to find more food. So it really depends on where in the polar bears range you're looking in terms of how far they end up traveling for food. And polar bears have some different strategies about finding food, which we can talk about later in the season for sure. One cool thing about polar bears, at least in this area, is that many of them do have what we call site fidelity. So where they are in the tundra now, the sea ice freezes up, the bears take off, they do their thing, they look for seals for months on end on the sea ice, and then they come back. They tend to come back to about the same area. And this is especially true for female polar bears who are denning. They tend to den in the same area where we think that they were probably born in. So they know it's a good, safe place. They want to keep coming back to that place on land. So that's something kind of cool. And that's how we also know we can do these population counts, because these bears tend to stay in this rough same population. There is some intermixing physically and genetically amongst the populations, but generally we know the Western Hudson Bay bears, if we find them at Cape this year, they'll probably be at Cape at the same roughish time next year, depending. So that's a kind of neat thing about polar bears. And one last question, and then we're going to say goodbye. What are the risks of tagging the polar bears? That's from Itzy Holly. Very thoughtful question. Are there risks to doing this type of research? There is risk to any sort of wildlife research that you do, but I will say that the way the polar bear research is conducted is very, very thoughtful. Of course, when you are handling any animal, especially an animal that's vulnerable or threatened, you want to be very careful how you do it. So the type of drugs that are used and the type of handling that's done is very careful, and it's the polar bears respond very well to it, I should say that. And with all these decades of data, we've been able to see that the polar bears don't have any adverse reactions to any of what goes on, whether they're being collared or just tagged or handled in other ways. They are doing just fine. They're tough, and the research is quick and fast, and as least invasive as it can be. And that's actually one thing Polar Bears International is working on as well. And we'll talk about it more as the season goes on, so stay with us. We are working on even less invasive ways to work with polar bears and to track them. There's some pretty cool things that we're doing so that we can find out even more about polar bears, and they barely even know we're trying to do it. So stay tuned with us for the rest of the season as we come to you with Kieran and Dave live from Buggy One. Some of us live from Montana, some of us live from across Canada and different places. We're going to keep an eye on the polar bears every day on all the different cams. We're here for you in the comments, on Facebook, on these live chats. And we also do have a series of educational webcasts, more for kids in the classroom, but anyone's welcome to join. Those are our Tundra Connections webcasts. All the schedules are posted on the polarbearsinternational.org website, and I also believe on the explore.org website. And your amazing cam ops and mods, I'm sure, will also be there to answer questions and help direct you to any of that information that you might be interested in. So we should say thank you so much for joining us today, tuning in, for your questions. We do have our second Tundra Connections webcast tomorrow if you'd like to tune in. That's at 2 p.m. Central. And we're going to be talking about tracking polar bears with STEM. And then next week we have some great live chats for you as well. And we're hoping to squeeze one in with Mike Fitz. So Ranger Mike of the Brown Bear Cam, I think he's going to be able to join us next week. So we will get that information up on the schedule for you as well. And yeah, in the meantime, please enjoy zenning out with polar bears on the tundra. I know I sure feel lucky to be able to do my work on my computer with the bears on my television screen. That feels very special. Do you guys want to say anything to the community before we log off for now?
Well, like I said earlier, I'm happy that we were able to make this all happen this year, and I look forward to spending the next few weeks out here. And if it's anything like today, then it's going to be a great season. We're going to see lots more.
Yeah, I just want to say that it was a bit of footwork getting this stuff figured out, how we were going to be able to make the cams work in the era of COVID, and I'm just happy to have Dave and Kieran in Churchill to be able to put this stuff together. So thanks to both of you guys. Also, thanks to the team at explore.org for working with us to stay committed and say, yes, let's make it happen again this year. So thanks to the team. We got a lot of really great people behind the scenes, really, driving the cams, making it all work, putting it together. So thanks to everybody there who's tuning in too, and thanks to you viewers for checking us out. We're looking forward to a great polar bear season here.
Totally. And another shout out to KT behind the scenes, who's working all these kinks out with BJ in Montana. It's crazy to pipe everything into this head office and then, send it out to the world like this. So we sure look forward to speaking with you all in the coming weeks, and even doing more comparisons between brown bears and polar bears, and just enjoying our time on the tundra before the bears leave. So with that, we'll say bye for now, and we'll see you soon. Thanks so much for today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.